have Professor Vivek Kumar amongst us as today's speaker. I'm not really sure how to go with the introduction of this talk. Very contemporary, but as well as very kind of a challenging topic, decoding Babasaheb Ambedkar, ideas and praxis. This is the title of today's talk. But before I invite Professor Vivek Kumar to speak, a little introduction about him. In fact, doesn't need any introduction, I say, but however, I want my best to Professor Vivek Kumar, sociologist, currently the professor of sociology in the Center for the Study of Social Systems and also a public intellectual. And he has been actively writing in different areas of sociological concerns, questions of methodology of social sciences in particular, and also the themes on the questions of marginalization, marginality, Dalit diaspora, Dalit politics, globalization, and so on, several related topics and themes. He has been a Fulbright scholar at Columbia University in 2012-13, and also visiting scholar in Asia and Africa Studies, Humboldt, Berlin, Germany. And he has been associated with several institutions at different parts of the world, and also different institutions and universities in India, and also an active scholar in the public domain as well, and currently is the professor in charge of Ambedkar chair here in this center. And I think this list can go on, so I'm trying to pause here and invite Professor to do this. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alexis. It's always very gratifying to be introduced so profusely. And very meticulously, you see, because I have harrowing experiences of being introduced, and then I discover it's me who is being introduced. So, thanks a lot. So today's title, which this talk or lecture, whatever you want, it's Decoding Babasaheb Ambedkar Ideas and Praxis. I believe and trust that most of you present here in your room for this lecture know much more about Babasaheb Ambedkar than I'm going to reveal and speak, particularly at this juncture in this age of information revolution, and because a number of lectures have been delivered, many more abler pen have written down many of the aspects of Babasaheb Ambedkar. Social scientists have also revealed more about Babasaheb Ambedkar's life. Then why at this juncture I have given the title of my lecture today, Decoding Babasaheb Ambedkar. I think some people may be perplexed. There are two very important reasons because of which I have titled this lecture as the way it is. One, the perspective with which I will deliver this lecture. The perspective is an important vantage point. And second, the process of reductionism and blackout of Babasaheb Ambedkar and his ideas that have taken place in the academia, media, and intelligentsia. Let's first highlight some of the significant facts about the perspective of this lecture. So this lecture, Perspective from Below, there can be a number of perspectives to understand Babasaheb Ambedkar. I've called my perspective as perspective from below. What do we understand by this perspective below? Perspective from below is a perspective in which knowledge is produced by the people who have their consciousness shaped out of their unique structural location at the lowest ebb of the Indian social order. The structural location is unique because it is due to their cumulative and collective exclusion. Cumulative exclusion means that they were simultaneously excluded from social, economic, political, religious, educational, spatial aspects of life, and collective here means that not a individual who suffers exclusion, rather the whole community suffers social exclusion, and further, their exclusion has a bearing on the construction of consciousness out of which this production of knowledge takes place. So I have tried to establish this perspective, taking leaf and taking anecdotes from number of social scientists. To begin with, I will definitely name 4 or 5 of them. One, of course, C. Wright Mills, Bourdieu, Peter Berger, and Paulo Freire. Mills argues that biography, history, and their interaction in society gives birth to sociological imagination out of which production of knowledge takes place. Bourdieu has highlighted how social and cultural capital affects the life chances of the individuals, and Berger talks about reality socially constructed. Last but not the least, Freire argues that pedagogy of the oppressed cannot be developed by the oppressors or practiced by the oppressors. Why? How can an oppressor implement a liberating pedagogy? That is the question. And therefore, clubbing all these 4 people or perspectives, we can show that how biography of producers of knowledge without any mainstream social cultural capital in the history has shaped the consciousness, and out of this shaped consciousness production of knowledge takes place, and therefore I call it as a perspective from below. Coming to the reductionism of Babasaheb Ambedkar, having defined this perspective, what exactly I mean by proposition of reductionism and blackout of Babasaheb Ambedkar. By reductionism, I mean that Babasaheb has been either understood only as a Dalit leader or as an intellectual who has been only engaged with caste or annihilation of caste. Further, many intellectuals still have a doubt that he was the chief architect of the Indian Constitution. Third, this reductionism also comes from when the intellectuals in academia who do not recognize different shades of his thoughts and perspectives with which he has tried to understand social realities of Indian society and the world society as a whole. The reductionism is writ large when the various stages of dynamics of his movement have been noticed or unnoticed. So, as far as the proposition blackout is concerned, I want to argue that he has been blacked out from the seminal literary, academic texts as well as visual and artistic words. And therefore, the blackout sometimes looks by design and sometimes by default. So let us take few examples to prove the point of reductionism. He has been reduced as a Dalit leader and an intellectual who has only engaged with annihilation of caste. The first example comes to my mind is Eleanor Zeliot's work, PhD work, where he has analyzed him, she has analyzed him and his movement as a particular caste movement and the movement of Mahars, not even leader of the whole ex-untouchable communities, and therefore, because of shame, she could not publish her PhD thesis, and it remained unpublished very long since a very unknown publisher, Blue Moon, published it. The second process of reductionism comes from a journalist, Arun Shourie, who became a cabinet minister in Vajpayee government, published a book, Worshipping the False God, to prove the point that Ambedkar was not chief architect of Indian Constitution. He was only a draftsman. That's the term he uses. And he also alleges that Babasaheb Ambedkar was a stooge to British. The third example of reductionism comes very recently, very late, in 2014, and this is by a literary personality, Arundhati Roy. In her effort to popularize Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing, Annihilation of Caste, she published a book-length volume where the introduction was bigger than the text to prove the point. I don't know why, but that shows that how people have tried to understand. And therefore, reductionism to Babasaheb Ambedkar only as a Dalit leader, as a person who has engaged himself with the caste, is writ large by these examples. Understanding the blackout. The first literary work of Mulk Raj Anand's novel, Untouchable, in which Babasaheb Ambedkar has been completely blacked out and Gandhi is hailed as the emancipator of the untouchable. It is a fact that by the time Mulk Raj Anand had written this text, Ambedkar had already arrived on the horizon of emancipation of the Dalits. The second blackout, look into the sociology texts. G.S. Ghure's Caste and Race, the first published in 1932 from Routledge and Kegan Paul, London. The book was published not one, but of course many times, and it was published half a decade after Ambedkar had written the seminal article of Caste, Genesis, Mechanism and Spread, published in USA by Antiquary General, and of course the journal was published in New York. Even after first edition, Ghure published a number of other editions. However, he never take cognizance of Ambedkar's seminal writings, neither Caste, Genesis and Mechanism or Annihilation of Caste. Same is the case with Louis Dumont, Homo Hierarchus, first published in 1970 and with several other publications. Celestin Bogle, of course, very seminal text on caste, never takes into account Ambedkar's writings. These are few blackout from sociology text. The third example is from artistic, or you can say more, I will take it as it is blackout, which is observed in Richard Attenborough's directed film Gandhi in 1982, which is considered to be epic and a historical film. It was nominated for Academy Awards in 11 categories and won 8 categories, including Best Picture and Best Director Award. However, in this film, Ambedkar was totally blacked out. However, it is a fact that Gandhi had picked up removal of untouchability as one of the agenda of his movement after 1930s because of the conflict with Ambedkar. Gandhi struck up war with Ambedkar in Round Table Conference in London, his fast and to death against separate electorates in Yeroda jail, signing of Pune Pact in 1932, and then Gandhi and Ambedkar dialogue on annihilation of caste, all has been blacked out without any episode being filmed or even a frame of reference in Gandhi. Now, it is important why I am trying to, these episodes are not easy to be obliterated from the memory, and yet Ambedkar is completely blacked out. Now, you can definitely ask the question, why Ambedkar is so necessary in Gandhi? So the answer is, if Ambedkar is not necessary in Gandhi, then how Gandhi is necessary in Ambedkar? And Ambedkar, Jabbar Patel had directed, though I do not consider it is a very great film. It is episodic, biopic, very shallow researched film. But yet there is a film. And in every frame, Gandhi becomes relevant every time. And therefore, this raises a doubt. Is there a deliberate attempt of blackout of Ambedkar, or this is only by chance? Now, having given you this point of blackout and reductionism, why I am calling this as blackout and reductionism? The reason why I am calling it is simple, because there are facts, there are observed realities, and you do not need great research to prove how he has been revered in the social life, in this life, how he has been revered. And at least 5-6 aspects I will like to quote succinctly, very fast, so that there can be more discussion on this. One, how his followers and supporters has revered him on the basis of what is the
What are the adjectives which have been used by them? How have they revered Ambedkar? And I think that is one of the most important points. Second, how he has been eulogized in an educational institution, Columbia, when Columbia honored and awarded an honorary LLD degree in 1952, how the Western social scientists have tried to analyze, and D, the horizon and shapes of epistemologies and ontologies in his approach of his thought. Last but not least, the nature and dynamics of his movements. And that's why I call ideas and praxis. It's not only that Ambedkar was a theoretical producer of knowledge, rather he was also a practitioner, and therefore I'm trying to argue ideas and praxis. So let us briefly take us these facts one by one. At the outset, to understand the dimension of Babasaheb Ambedkar's personality, which his followers highlight and revere, Babasaheb followers address him as Vishwa Vibhuti, that means global icon, Bodhisattva, like Buddha, Bharat Ratna, the highest civilian, Samvidhan Nirmata, constitution maker, and of course doctor. Doctor is also associated every time. So at least, you can see that 5 epithets are being used. Bharat, Vishwa Vibhuti, Bharat Ratna, Bodhisattva, Babasaheb, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. This is the way the supporters and the followers revere him, and yet he is reduced only as Dalit leader. Now, we can definitely discuss that how these aspects, where Buddha, whether Bharat Ratna, the highest civilian award, a doctorate, all is being relegated to periphery, and only his caste identity is woke. This is something very, very difficult for me to digest and understand. Let us see the educational institution, how Ambedkar is revered in a formal institution like university. For instance, how did University of Columbia referred him while awarding honorary degree some 60 years back on June 5th, 1962. I still remember June 5th because that being my birthday, I still remember. 5th of 1962, the citation letter read like this, and I quote, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, LLD, for 3 years a graduate student in this university, receiving the doctorate in political science, subsequently a student of the Inns of Court and the University of London, obtaining a doctorate in economics, for the past 3 decades a barrister, university professor, as a framer of the Constitution and one of India's leading citizens, a great social reformer and a valiant upholder of human rights. I do not find any mention of his biography, caste, or his social primordial identity being invoked. And yet, we keep on listening. Ambedkar, a lower caste person, fighting this battle. This is, of course, how the Western academia has tried to look into and take into account his social, his achievements in the sphere of higher education. Let me quote again from Perry Anderson, Indian Ideology. Gandhi did not claim much book learning. Nehru, on the other hand, enjoyed higher education. Gandhi lacked. It would be unfair to compare Nehru to Ambedkar. Intellectually, head and shoulder above most of the Congress leaders, in part due to far more serious training in LSE and Columbia to read whom is to enter in different world altogether. Anderson, unquote. Apart from taking recognition or cognizance of his academic credential, Anderson also took note of his political foresight. According to Anderson, when Gandhi, Nehru, whole Congress and even Muslim League did not have a clue about the outcome of India's struggle for independence, Ambedkar alone had a solution of Hindu-Muslim conflict. In his own words, and I quote, Ambedkar, in 1944 published the only serious work which could determine the outcome of the struggle for independence, Pakistan or Partition of India, whose references range from Renan to Acton to Carter, from Canada to Ireland to Switzerland, stands a devastating indictment of intellectual poverty of Congress and its leaders, critical to Muslim introversion, alert to Sarvakar's Hindutva, contemptuous to myth of pan-religious amity. Ambedkar did not advocate suppression of two communities, but he proposed referenda to determine popular wishes, and in the event that Muslims insisted on it, sketched boundaries he thought might endure. So this is the way Ambedkar is being eulogized by the Western writers, a historian from California, Penny Anderson, and of course this is the data which he has left already. This is a written document, and this book was sold in number of editions, not one edition or a edition, and written in 1944. In the same way, if you read very recently Cosimo Zene, edited volume, The Political Philosophy of Antonio Gramsci and Ambedkar, which includes contribution of at least 14 of these scholars. Scientists have tried to argue that how Ambedkar's ideas can be compared with Antonio Gramsci. It has been, of course, published from Routledge, London, and it has yet to be published in India. I have not seen any Indian publication. And yet in the academic, social and political educational achievements and contribution of Ambedkar, people have not accepted his general idea as the Western academia in particular has accepted. The mainstream media, intelligentsia and academia in India have reduced Ambedkar only to the status of a Dalit leader. And if you really argue, some of the progressive intellectuals, oh, he was also constitution maker. So that being the argument that how he has been revered, and these facts have been yet not accepted in India. Coming to the other, his thought. It is in this context we would like to highlight Ambedkar's various shades of thoughts, and I think people are aware of it. I'm just trying to underline, and these only are sketchy business. It's not very great to detail because of paucity of time. I'm just trying to argue that 10 shades, at least 10 shades can be 10 shades of his thoughts can be observed in writing and speeches which have been posthumously published by government of Maharashtra. These thoughts are social, political, economic, religious, gender, educational, legal, constitutional, developmental, and human rights specific. And these are being evaluated gradually, but of course not in the academia. Epistemology of Ambedkar's thought. Ambedkar has produced empirical knowledge and not produced only speculative philosophy. His empirical knowledge has at least 8 shades and sources of data collection. 8 sources of data collection. These are archaeological sources, Indological sources, government reports as the source, and the government commission's report and committee's reports are also there. Newspaper clippings, 1930s, 34s, Times of India clippings you can find. His direct observation and experience reality is fine, but he also relies on books and journals. These are 8 shades, and there are a number of permutation and combination of these sources of production of knowledge. So apart from these shades of thoughts and epistemology of knowledge, we can observe Ambedkar has adopted multiple approaches for producing knowledge. We can observe at least 4 approaches in his writings. These are civilizational, historical, evolutionary, and comparative approach for production of knowledge. To take one example to prove the point, for instance, while understanding religion in India or philosophy of Hinduism, he began by tracing the origin of religion in different civilizations. He then differentiated between religion and theology. He also used Max Muller, Emil Durkheim, Max Weber, etc. to understand the meaning of religion in modern societies as well as tribal societies. He tried to differentiate between three types of religions: the book, the revealed religion, and the book religion, and he did not find how to place Indian religion or Hindu religion in any of these typologies. Having discussed the perspective, the comparative perspective, I think if you take this example of untouchability, he discusses untouchability along with Roman slavery as well as American slavery, how these slaveries are different and how American and Roman slavery is different from untouchability. And very important characteristics of slavery and difference between untouchability comes that who owns the slaves? In slavery, at least master is known. People know that, look, he is my master and I am his slave. But in untouchability, he is slave for all, but there is no master to take care of. And therefore, he calls that slavery, untouchability is much more heinous than the slavery. Though people, when I try to talk to people in US, especially the black people and the colored, they did not agree, and they had their own point of discussion. Now, having said this, given you the perspective, the epistemology, as well as his area of thought, one more important aspect of his thought is the thought of his modernity. Modernity is always, in his work has always tried to look into that, that he has taken, because as the framer of constitution, he has taken this concept of modernity from equality, liberty, and fraternity, as the French Revolution says. But Ambedkar is very categorical in arguing that no, I have not taken it from the French Revolution, rather from Buddhist, my master, the Buddha. And why he says so? He argues that in this frame of reference, modernity, equality, liberty, and fraternity are the cardinal principles of the modernity. But in Buddhism, fraternity is given at the highest pedestal. And why he says that fraternity has acquired the highest pedestal? Because you can make a law for equality, you can make a law for liberty, but you cannot make a law for fraternity. Fraternity has to evolve from within, and therefore Ambedkar argued that individualistic revolution is much more important than the collective revolution, as has been argued in the Western modernity. And therefore he compares Karl Marx and Buddha. So there is a tendency now these are the few ideas. I'm just trying to give you a sketch that these are the ideas which have not yet been elaborated, discussed, and this is not the perspective which has been evolved. The other idea, the last one, is nationalism and nationality. Nation, nationalism, and nationality. This also has not been evolved and looked into, and Babasaheb Ambedkar has very lucidly talked about the ideas of nation building, and the future of nation. I'm just not going into that detail, but if you have questions, definitely I'd love to reflect. Now, having given you the idea, let us come to the praxis. There is a tendency among scholars and laymen alike to reduce Ambedkar's movement as an undifferentiated monolithic whole. However, if we analyze his activities a little bit closely, we can easily divide Babasaheb's movement into 6 different yet interrelated stages. And these phases are complementary and supplementary to each other. For achieving equality, liberty, fraternity, and justice, not only for the Dalits but also for other social groups in general and Indian society in particular. Each phase enriched his experience in fighting against the existing inequalities of the Hindu social order. The periodization of his leadership is also necessary to understand the rationale of his changing socio-political stances in his long struggle. To begin with, the first phase, when did Ambedkar arrive on the emancipation horizon? And I think the time which I have tried to look into, it is 1990. The first phase of his emancipatory agenda begins in 1919 when he comes and gives a memorandum to Southborough Committee, and that's where he begins. And this continued till 1930s. During this period, he acted more like a social reformer while fighting against the rigid caste system and its draconian practice of untouchability. He was convinced by the knowledge of the world history that history bears the proposition that political revolutions have always proceeded by the social and religious revolutions. That is why Ambedkar gives example and quotes from all over the world, starting from Puritans to Arabs to Buddhists in India. And that's why he tries to look that there has to be social reform which is preceded by the political reform. And he tries to start forming organizations. Baiskit Hitkarani Society was in 1924, which could place the social and political problems before the government. Second, in his phase, Babasaheb Ambedkar launched Mahar Satyagraha. The Satyagraha is not only the freedom of Mr. Gandhi, that is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, because there are now many Gandhis. So you can. So this actually, he also led a Satyagraha and also burning the Manu Smriti, the book. Justifying his action of Manu Smriti, Ambedkar said that on 3rd February 1928, in the issue of Bahiskrit Bharat, that his reading of Manu Smriti has convinced him that it was abusive and insulting in its treatment to the Shudras, and it did not even remotely support the idea of social equality. To burn a thing was to register protest against the idea of representation. In the same way, in the second phase, Ambedkar organized largest and the longest Satyagraha, that is 2nd March in 1930 at Nasik for the Dalit entry into Kala Ram temple. It is Kala Ram because Ram here is black and therefore it is Kala Ram. Around 1500 Mahars and Chamahars had assembled at Nasik, but the temple had been closed for about a year to keep them away from entering. The Parvati Satyagraha in Pune also met the same fate. Although Ambedkar was leading the movement for temple entry, but he never wanted to enter into the temple in real sense of the term. And I quote in his own words, "I did not launch the temple entry movement because I wanted the depressed classes to become worshippers of the idols, which they were prevented from worshipping, or because I believed that the temple entry would make them equal members in an integral part of Hindu society. So far as this aspect of the case is concerned, I would advise the depressed classes not to insist upon completing or entering into the temple. Rather, you need a complete overhaul of Hindu society and Hindu ideology before they consent to become an integral part. I started temple entry Satyagraha only because I felt that that was the best way to energize the depressed classes and make them conscious of their possession." Now, this is the first epoch of his leadership where he is acting like a social reformer. The second phase started in 1930, where he becomes a political leader, and he tries to look into the establishment of human rights for the Dalits, and as also citizenship rights. And that's why he says that citizen is a bundle of rights such as personal liberty, personal security, right to hold private property, equality before law, liberty of conscience, freedom of opinion and speech, right to assembly, right to representation in a country's government, and so on and so forth. And therefore, he argues that we have to establish the untouchables should be considered as citizens. And then he goes on to ask for separate electorate, forms political party, and leads the political movement. I'm rushing through so that actually I can cover a little bit more. You all know that when he got and he won the rights, political rights, he had already carved out a vast mass, which was a political mass for him. Earlier to that, Dalits were not even considered worthy enough to be casting their vote, but now their votes cannot be wished away, and they became a political category whose rights have to be understood. This episode ended when he entered into the third stage, third phase, and that phase I call it as he enters in the Constituent Assembly as the chairman of the drafting committee. Ambedkar's entrance into Constituent Assembly, even against his will, is regarded as the third phase of leadership of Ambedkar for the amelioration of not only Dalits but millions of Indians. Ambedkar bore the burden not only of drafting the various democratic principles but also defending them clause by clause. The Constituent Assembly worked for 2 years, 11 months and 17 days since it first met on 19th December 1946. That means Ambedkar had to be present on all these days. Further, in this regard, one can also look into amount of labor and time Ambedkar had put in for preparing the Constitution. And I quote, the total number of amendments of the draft constituents, and I think this data will reveal that how much work he had to do, and actually these are the answers to some people who do not consider him as the constitution maker. The total number of amendments to the draft constitution tabled were approximately 7,635. 7,635 amendments were there in the draft constitution. Of them, the total number of amendments actually moved in the parliament was 2,473. That means Ambedkar had to discard 5,162 amendments that look, these amendments are of no worth and therefore they should not be considered, and that has to be put out. And he considered at least 2,473 amendments. Now, reading these 7,635 amendments is not the task of a draftsman. And also defending them in the constitution is not the task of the draftsman. And therefore, I condemn the belittling of Ambedkar's task, the Herculean task. I'm not talking about one data I got while I was reading this Constituent Assembly debates, that how many times Ambedkar stood in a day to defend that order. When he had to defend, how many times he used to get up. And I was counting at least 20-25 days activity that how Ambedkar was getting up. And I saw that 9 and 10 times Ambedkar used to get up. First he used to move a memorandum, then he used to answer them, then he used to defend them, and then there were actually counter arguments and so on and so forth. But there were extraordinary days when he stood for 25 and 26 times in a day to speak, to defend. And you know, when he was defending, you can understand that how much he used to speak. And those have been codified. I hope that one day our sociologists and social scientists, political scientists will read those documents and then argue that what Ambedkar stood for. The members of the Constituent Assembly have accepted the amount of labor, both intellectual and physical, that has been put by Ambedkar in preparation of final shape of the Constitution. T.T. Krishnamachari, I do not want to read, there's a long quote, but he says that, Mr. President, sir, I'm one of those in the House who have listened Dr. Ambedkar very carefully. I am aware the amount of work and enthusiasm that he has brought to bear on the work on the drafting constitution. the House is perhaps aware of the 7 members nominated by you. One had resigned from the House and was never replaced. One died and was never replaced. One was in America and his place was not filled up to another person. Another person was engaged in state affairs and there was a void to that extent. 1 or 2 people were away from Delhi and perhaps reason of health did not permit them to attend. So it happened ultimately that the burden of drafting this constitution fell on Ambedkar, and I have no doubt whatsoever that he has taken it gratefully for having achieved this task in a manner which is undoubtedly commendable. This is volume 13, page 72. You can read. If this was the contribution of Ambedkar in the making of the constitution, and yet people have not accepted. Now, coming to this stage or this epoch of his leadership ended when the constitution was passed and he became, of course, the first minister. Now, Ambedkar also had acted like a religious renouncer, and he renounced. He came back to his own religion. That's what his true religion. And on 14th of October 1956, he took up that religion. You can definitely have a discussion on this, but I will like to argue only one case, that because I have read one of my sociology friends in the center that he wrote, and I quote, that Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism was a political act. Now, the answer comes from Zeliot, and he quoted Zeliot. The person has quoted Zeliot, that Zeliot is saying that this conversion is a political gimmick. When I looked Zeliot, I was sad. It was not written at all by Zeliot. And what Zeliot says, I want to quote here so that you can definitely look into that, how misinformation has been spread even by the tallest of the sociologists in the country about Ambedkar. I will give you, if you want, I can give you the article. That article you can read, and you can also look into what Zeliot has said. Ambedkar's delayed conversion came long back. I'm quoting this. Ambedkar conversion came long back after a period of combining the conversion idea and political expediency. And by then, reference to the conversion as a political threat had lost its significance. Instead, it had reference to the great Asian Buddhist world, the reputation of Buddhism as important religion both in India and West. What political gain should Dalits would have acquired had they converted? Rather, it was a loss to them, because conversion to Buddhism would have devoid them reservations. Now, if this is the case, how can this be called only as a political gimmick? I think that is a $1 million question to be analyzed. But what is important for us to understand, that when Ambedkar was trying to convert, he read religion, and especially he quotes that sciences of religion had come, and it had deep understanding of religions of the world. Of course, I told you that he had read Max Muller, Max Weber, and Emile Durkheim at that time. Marx was not very popular during that period, so he has not engaged himself with that. He also knew about theology and ritual of the two parts of the religion. However, he was convinced about the necessity of the religion in the society. According to him, religion is the most significant institution which helps in social control. Law cannot have full control in the society. That is why he argued religion is very essential for the society as well as for the excluded and exploited masses. But that religion should be egalitarian. Religion has to be egalitarian. That is why he chose Buddhism as he was talking about that this is an egalitarian and it has a principle of equality, liberty, and fraternity. And second, there is no mediator between God and people. People can be their own guide. Attadipo bhava. There is no church and no idea of soul rebirth. Hence, Buddha's gospel will be the most effective emancipatory ideology for the Dalits who needed a psychological boost and social uplift. That is why Ambedkar chose Buddhism as its religion. So, Ambedkar conversion was also, preceded by his participation in Buddhist conference, World Buddhist Conference in November 1956. And of course, Ambedkar had popularized the idea of Buddha in his book, that is a very voluminous book, Buddha and his Dhamma, and he's trying to reform Buddha, and that's why his Buddhism is considered as Navayana Buddha, it's a new yarn. And the four most important question which he raises in Buddha and his Dhamma, one, that how Brahmanical interpretation of Buddha has crept into Buddhism. And that's why people try to ask these questions, that Buddha saw an old man and therefore he was actually attracted towards Pravajana. He saw old man, he saw a dead man, and he saw a sick man. All these, and therefore he was led to Pravajana. You know that Buddha was attracted towards Pravajana at the age of 29. Can we imagine that for 29 he must have not seen an old man or a dead man? I think that's why he argued. Second, there is a story that Buddha went without telling to his wife, without discussing and debating, and he went. And that's why Sumitranand Pant wrote, Sakhi wo busse keh karke jate. I think that was the poem, long poem, that he's a patriarch and therefore he left without. But in Jatakas, there is a discussion that how Buddha discussed this, that how can I leave my young child and my old parent? And then his wife comes and asks that, look, you are going for the emancipation of the humanity. I will take care of your child as well as your old father. Please go. This is good for the humanity. And that's where Buddha leaves. So there are, roles, discussions and debates about the role of Buddhism in the life of people as far as emancipatory ideology. Last but not the least, the praxis comes that Ambedkar as an educator. Apart from these 4 or 5 shades, Ambedkar also, is of course an educator who, of course, who can forget his slogan, educate, agitate and organize. But this educate, agitate and organize, people have tried to argue, comes from again Buddhism. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. Educate, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Agitate, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami, you agitate. And organize, that means Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. That is also an imprint that we can really elaborate. During this period, he brought at least 5 newspapers to educate his own people as well as masses. Muknayak, Hero of the Dumb, started in 1920s, Bahiskrit Bharat in 1927, Samata, and that is equality, and Janata, people, and last but not the least, the Prabuddha Bharat. So we see a gradual dynamics in Ambedkar's thought, that he begins with Hero of the Dumb, but he is imagining a society which is Prabuddha Bharat and enlightened India, and that's where he is trying to enlighten his people. In 1956, he also tried to look into the awakening of the people, and therefore he formed People's Education Society, Mumbai in 1945, and in 1946 he established Siddhartha College of Arts and Science to provide basic, non-discriminatory and scientific, I'm finishing, this is the last line, scientific education of Dalits and other. And I visited this college where I saw sociology was one of the disciplines. When people talk about that they should be taught only that vocational education, Ambedkar was totally against that. And he wanted the higher education, a scientific higher education, philosophical education to be taught so that production of new knowledge can take place from the downtrodden and exploited communities. And therefore, that emancipation will come from education. And of course, he was leading this light from his predecessors. And therefore, friends, my simple argument is that if we really want to engage with Ambedkar, let us not reduce him only to Dalits and caste. There is much larger body of knowledge, much larger body of his praxis that can be analyzed and understood to make real sense of Ambedkar's contribution, not only in terms of academia, intelligentsia, or in media, but also in terms of philosophy, in terms of movements, and in terms of other religious engagements. Thank you.
I was not really trying to give a chip to you. I was writing my notes.
I thought that it's time.
No.
Because I know that